Hey, good morning, Pete, North Las Vegas. We're going to be installing this onto this. And I'm going to go straight to an offset retainer pin. And there's a problem that seems to happen a little bit more often than I thought it did, and that's when the buffer makes contact with the top of that retainer pin during firing, which is not supposed to happen. When you close the two halves of the rifle together, the bolt carrier group is supposed to come down and push the buffer off of the retaining pin. I found this problem on a few of my rifles, and this is an AR-15 buffer, but you can see where this buffer was hitting that top of the retaining pin during firing, and it was starting to get pretty chewed up on the edge. Now, this rifle didn't start off this way, so it must have been right on the edge when I bought the rifle, and then over time, a little bit of wear, a little bit of this and that. So this came out of one of my old Colts, and in that Colt I also installed that offset retainer pin. So when we get this all put together, I'll kind of, for those of you that are new to the AR platform, I'll show you exactly what we're talking about. Okay, so I forgot to mention that I've been getting my offset retaining pins from a company called Galloway Precision. All right, so on your carbine buffer, this is the same as your standard AR-15 type carbines, or M4, CAR-15, whatever you want to call it. This is just a standard buffer tube. It's not specific to the 308. Same thing with the end plate, castle nut. What is different on the LR308 is the spring. The spring is a lot stiffer, and this is an AR type carbine buffer, and this is the LR308. So you can see that the 308 buffer is quite a bit shorter. So those are your two differences on a carbine buffer for your LR308. You can have a shorter buffer and a stiffer spring. This is Aero Precision, and it's 3.8 ounces. Okay, so there's a little bit of controversy or conflicting information whether you should use any lubrication at all on your buffer tubes. There's some people talking about galvanic, or what's commonly referred to as dissimilar metal corrosion. When you have two different metals, you can get some interaction between the anode and the cathode of the metals, and one tries to give up electrons, one tries to take electrons, and that's basically what's causing your corrosion. You can see that Aero's using 775 on their tube. This is 775, so we don't have any dissimilar metal. I mean, there's still the possibility that because this has graphite in with the copper NICs, that could possibly introduce some corrosion. But I've decided that I generally put a little bit of lube on these things, and you can see my decision as to whether copper anti-seize with graphite in it is going to be a problem. Okay, so when you're installing an offset, you want that lower shelf lined up with the edge of your buffer tube. So you gotta kind of watch out for the alignment. Okay, so that's what you want. Okay, so on my first LR308 build, I did not have enough engagement between the back of the bolt carrier group and the buffer. So like we were talking about at the first part of the video, where that buffer, if there's not enough engagement, will hit that retaining pin and damage the buffer, and over time maybe break a retainer or cause damage to the rifle. And you can see that here we have too much engagement. So we are going back to the original. Okay, so we got the mil-spec dimension back in there. It's not quite as much engagement as I would like to have, but when I get this thing all the way down, it does come off the retaining pin. I wish it was a little tighter, but that offset is that I had in there originally was too much, and this one's maybe not quite enough. I can see that it's definitely coming off of the retaining pin, but I wish there was a little bit more. All right, well, I'll keep an eye on it. If it starts getting chewed up, we'll put the offset back in there, even though I run into engagement problems at the top. Okay, so it's probably a good idea that you stake your castle nut. I never do. If you see any of my rifles where these are staked, it means that I bought the lower complete, and I only have a few of those. Out of the 3 I bought complete, 2 of them were staked from the factory, 1 was not. Like I said, it's probably a good idea that you do, but I never do. Okay, so in my opinion, this is probably the best on the market. And this captures your barrel extension. This captures your charging handle, bolt carrier key slot in the receiver. So this locks the receiver to this, to the extension. So if you use this upper receiver rod to tighten your barrel nut, you are really going to have to try to screw things up. And there's other upper receiver rods on the market, but they don't have this sail to capture the receiver. All they're doing is locking in your barrel extension. So there's still the possibility that, you know, as you tighten this barrel nut under the receiver, that you're putting a lot of stress and strain on the receiver, and it's trying to torque the receiver into the pin, the locating pin on your barrel. So let me pop that barrel nut off. I got to put some lube on there anyway. On the barrel nut, Aero shell is what's recommended. Like I said, I just use some copper anti-seize. Not worried about that galvanic dissimilar metal thing. Okay, so some of the information in this video, I know that you guys that build quite a few ARs, you probably already know a lot of this stuff, but some of my comments and things I talk about in the video are geared to people maybe that haven't put one together yet. So as you torque this barrel nut on to the receiver threads, at some point that barrel nut is going to start applying a lot of friction and torque to the barrel extension flange here, and is going to want to rotate the barrel inside the receiver. And at that point, the only thing that's holding it is this locating pin on your barrel. So there's the possibility that, you know, you could damage your receiver, you could break this, and that's why I use these upper receiver rods. And like I said, I think Midwest makes the best one on the market, because it captures the receiver and prevents rotation, captures the barrel extension lugs and prevents rotation while you're tightening this. So a lot less chance for damaging your rifle. All right, so like I said, I'm gonna get this barrel torqued on. I'm using another Midwest Industries handguard. And they supply a barrel nut wrench. Okay, so for a while there on YouTube, the latest fashion trend was to take this and lap it and get that all squared up and straightened out with whatever tool they were using to do that with. And I never saw anybody lap the barrel lug to go along with that. Maybe I just missed those videos. But I know for a fact the one video that I never saw was somebody lapping the inside shelf of their barrel nut. Now you can see that that's not like the most precise, well-finished shelf. And for those of you that may not know, that shelf right there is what butts up against the outside of the extension lug here. And this is the part that butts up against the receiver. So you can see it's a little rough in there. Now, Midwest uses a steel barrel nut, which is stronger. But you can see where, because of the shelf in there, aluminum barrel nut maybe not quite as strong, but it's going to be more forgiving. So it's probably going to mate up with your barrel lug a little bit better. But I'm pretty confident after we get about 40 foot-pounds on this thing, it'll seal up all the way around, even though that's not the nicest machining job. And it's got kind of a relief cut, an indentation behind the ridge right here. So as that ridge makes contact with the barrel lug, it'll flatten itself out a little bit, and should make pretty much almost 100% contact with the outside of the extension lug here on the barrel. So I've never worried about squaring up my receiver. If you're not going to square up everything, what's the point of going through all the trouble to make this perfectly straight and square as far as you can tell with whatever tool you bought versus your barrel nut and your extension lugs. All right, well, I'm gonna go put this barrel together. One last thing, on this Wilson combat barrel, I did find a little bit of leftover stuff in here, and it seemed like maybe polishing compound or something left over from the machining. So you wanna make sure that you get both sides of this clean, your receiver. I know I'm being Captain Obvious here, but the inside, get all your threads cleaned up. Use your favorite lube. If you go mil-spec, it's Aero shell. And yeah, just make sure everything's cleaned up before you slap it all together. Midwest recommends 40 foot-pounds on their barrel net. So we're gonna go out to the garage, slide this thing in, hold everything together, and torque it down, and then we'll be back, take a look, and some final thoughts. Okay, barrel nuts on, recommended 40 foot-pounds according to Midwest Industries. I did tighten this and back it off a few times. A lot of people call that seasoning the threads. You're just working the threads in with the receiver to the barrel nut and making sure that you're getting as much engagement as possible. And also that shelf that I was showing you inside the barrel nut that mates up with the extension. Each and every time you tighten this, I think that's helping that to seat also, and maybe a slight amount of crush. But anyway, yeah, this thing's on. I did check the feed ramps in here, and the feed ramps are good. The starting point of the feed ramps is behind the receiver, which is what you want. If these feed ramps were sticking out here in front of the receiver, that's going to hang your round or your bullet up as it tries to chamber. Now the bottom area here, for some reason, that is protruding a slight amount. But the actual feed ramps themselves, they're back in there pretty good. Now I think if I have a round that's trying to feed right there, I've probably got bigger problems. Okay, so maybe this is a better angle, but you can kind of see that the feed ramps aren't coming out in front of the receiver. So even though that center section is overhanging a little bit, calling it good. Okay, we've got about as far as I can go with it today. My adjustable gas block is on back order, so I'm waiting for that to come in. And once we get that in, there's a few things I wanted to talk about on a DPMS pattern 308, an LR308, as far as gas tube length. Some things you guys might want to know about that, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. All right, Pete, North Las Vegas. Over and out.